as best we can. We're going to try to answer questions as best we can. And if you do have any questions that aren't addressed, please hold them to the end, type them to the chat. We'll get a hold of them and we'll try to make sure you get answers, but also bearing in mind that there are some questions within the presentation that we won't have time to cover, but we'll send you the slides that have information on the questions you've submitted before. So with that being said, I would like to take a moment. I gave you a lot of information. So let's take a moment together to breathe, ground ourselves in this space. Take a moment to appreciate the fact that we have this opportunity and this ability to come together and advocate on behalf of water. And I'd like you to take a breath, close your eyes, and think to the very last time that you used water. For some of you, it was just before you signed on to this meeting. Maybe you washed your hands, maybe you rinsed out a dish, maybe you watered your lawn. Think about how privileged we are to have access to water and how it becomes our responsibility to safeguard and steward this water so that our communities, our children, and our children's children can continue to have access to water. And as we're considering this responsibility, I'd like us to think and give reverence to the indigenous peoples, the original stewards and inhabitants of this land who did such a phenomenal job of stewarding and protecting water, who for generations held this responsibility and continue to take this responsibility very seriously. And I want us to acknowledge and consider the fact that these peoples are still here. We are guests in their home, and our work and our responsibility as co-inhabitants and stewards of water is to use and manage it responsibly, to respect it, to honor it, to protect it, and to ensure its health and vitality. And so with that acknowledgement, with that understanding, I would like you to take another breath, give thanks for your water. And if you know, please type into the chat whose indigenous lands you are currently occupying as we give reverence to the peoples who stewarded this water and continue to fight for this water to this day. I am tuning in from the Tabangar, the indigenous lands of the Kitch, Gabrielino, Tongva people. And I am so grateful for the legacy that was left and is still here, and is for me to continue to advocate and benefit from as we safeguard and acknowledge these peoples in this place, in this land. And without further ado, as you type into the chat, the peoples and the places that you inhabit, I will turn it over to Tori, our amazing facilitator, to give you some more information about drinking water quality in and how we can be more better advocates for that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Talia. And thank you for kind of getting us all into this space together. So while you all are typing into the chat box, I'm gonna get my slides prepped. Just a moment. And actually also while I'm doing that, I'd like to introduce you to my new colleague, Andrea, who's going to also be sharing some information with you today about navigating consumer confidence reports. So we're excited to dig into that with you today. So let me see you really quick. There we go. Okay. So let me know when all of you can see my screen, hopefully in a moment, if not now. Great. I see some thumbs up. So in the last few workshops, we've gotten to talk a lot about drinking water quality, to learn about common contaminants, to learn about kind of fragmentation of drinking water systems in LA County. Looked at that map of kind of all the different boundaries, how neighbors just a few blocks from each other might be served by a totally different system with a totally different water source. And we reflected a little on the sources of pollution for drinking water, on kind of the data that are available to better understand your drinking water quality. And today we have 3 topics of focus. I think, let me make sure there we go, that were highlighted and kind of brought forward in the last drinking water quality workshop. And those are understanding better how water pollution is tied to drinking water quality, understanding how to review your water system's consumer confidence report or drinking water quality report, and understanding a little bit more about drinking water in schools and the data available around that, and kind of the unique set of kind of challenges and opportunities around improving drinking water in K through 12 schools. There are also a lot of other really thoughtful questions that all of you asked during the first workshop and in person during the Santa Monica Arcadia water treatment plant tour. And we're in the process of putting together a kind of maybe not frequently asked questions, but a catch-all set of responses to those questions. So if you have more questions today that you drop in the chat or that you voice verbally that you want to make sure we include in that list, feel free to share with us, and then we'll be sending that out via email likely next week. So some of the questions that we have here that aren't circled, we aren't going to get into in a ton of detail today, but we can kind of circle back and make sure you have references to dig into them more if you so desire. So those are the kind of 3 main topics, and then we'll just revisit the list of questions that were previously asked. So to start with water pollution and drinking water, as we know, LA County's water comes from different sources, and the source of your specific drinking water that's delivered to your house or to your child's school or to where you work depends on the water system that serves you and their kind of their potential suite of water sources. Some water systems are reliant on a single source. Some have kind of a set of sources, and that's seen as perhaps allowing them to be more resilient to impacts to a single water source. And each water source can be exposed to contaminants in different ways. So groundwater can be impacted by contamination in a different way than surface water or water taken from other areas of the state or the country can be impacted. And both natural and human sources can impact both groundwater and surface water. So you can have, say, metals that are present in a groundwater basin that contribute to that groundwater source kind of via natural processes, or you can have, say, chemicals that are used for agriculture that leach into a groundwater basin over time, and that would be more human sources of contamination. And you can see at the right here, this pie chart of LA County's sources of water. It's a little out of date, but it's a good reference from a few years back that kind of looked at the county holistically. And you can see that about 1/3 of our water is local groundwater or local surface reservoirs. And then the vast majority is imported water, either LADWP's water imported from the Owens River Valley or Payahunadu via the LA Aqueduct, or Metropolitan's imported water via the State Water Project or from the Colorado River. And then you can see the smallest portion of that pie chart, local recycled water, And that's thus far not for direct potable use. But in the future, part of LA County's goal to become more locally water resilient and less reliant on taking water from other lands is to expand water recycling. And the last note that I want to make here is that water systems are required to say, to provide information about the potential sources of regulated contaminants that are detected in their water in their consumer competence reports. And we'll go into those CCRs in more detail in a few minutes. So I wanted to kind of ground us in our path to tap graphic that we got to go into in some detail in the first drinking water quality workshop. And if you see here, this is the first kind of portion of today's workshop is focused on this first part of the pathway to tap on the water source and potential treatment to remove contaminants that might be present in one water source, but not present in another. And that's why treatment being designed for the specific water source is really important. So you might remember this graphic as well. This is a summary of the contaminants that are kind of responsible for the failing water systems across the state of California. If you remember from the first workshop, there are hundreds of water systems, largely in the Central Valley, the agricultural region of California, that are considered failing and that are violating health-based standards. Fortunately for us in LA County, relatively few of our systems are considered failing or considered to be violating health-based standards. That's not to say we don't have our own issues for sure, but and you can see they're kind of a suite of contaminants that are most responsible for violations, both primary MCLs and for secondary maximum contaminant levels as well. But I wanted to focus our conversation in on the most common contaminants in LA County. And you can see that those are arsenic and coliform. Again, fortunate for the greater LA County area that most of us live in and are engaged in. A lot of those MCL violations are for smaller systems that are in the Antelope Valley area, so the kind of northern portion of LA County. And a lot of those are for naturally occurring arsenic. So again, that arsenic can be present in groundwater basins and make its way into the source water for a water system. The other one that's really common is, let's go to the next slide, is coliform, which is basically, total coliform is a bacterial organism or set of organisms that naturally occur in the environment and also in mammals' fecal waste. And total coliform itself is unlikely to cause illness, but it's kind of an indicator of potential bacterial contamination that can actually be dangerous. So a smaller subset of that can be dangerous. And the EPA and the California State Water Resources Control Board have recently revised what's called the total coliform rule to what is now called the revised total coliform rule, very creative. And its structure is now more focused on consistent monitoring and then tracking down potential problems or potential bacterial contamination in a water distribution system in the pipes that deliver water to people's homes. And so they're required, or water systems are required to take a certain number of samples in the distribution system. And if they have total coliform hits or positive results in a certain percent of those, then they have to go through this process of tracking down issues. And for those of you who made it out to Santa Monica a few weeks ago, if you remember in their lab, they were talking about those bacterial samples that they take frequently. And that was kind of a big focus of their laboratory work, because that's a recurring, regular set of samples and analysis that they have to do to make sure that the water that's being delivered to people's homes is safe. So when there are positive hits for total coliform, then the water system has to do those subsequent actions. And the fortunate thing in the last slide, if I can go back up, let's see, here we go. There's actually only one E. coli hit in all of these from 2014 to 2018. All of the systems in LA County only had one E. coli violation, which is a more dangerous to human health. So there were a bunch of kind of indicators that there might be an issue, and they chased down the issue and found that there was just the one problem that would actually have a negative impact on human health. So the next thing, and actually the last thing I want to highlight about coliform is that it's really important to kind of have source water protection. So to have wells that have kind of an appropriate distance from any source of bacterial contamination, and that the wells, their filter pack is safe. Next thing that we wanted to talk about briefly, since it's been detected or was the source of a violation in LA County, is trihalomethanes, which, if you remember from the first workshop, we talked about the importance of disinfecting water to keep people safe from microorganisms. Those disinfectants need to be added to water after enough organic matter has been removed so that they don't create these disinfection byproducts. So it's really important, especially for surface water, to have adequate treatment beforehand or before adding the disinfectant that keeps water safe from microorganisms, and then again to maintain wells properly. And then we've talked about manganese a few times as a group, and that's one of the sources of violations for LA County as well. It's commonly occurring in groundwater basins. I think about 1/3 of the water sources in California have some level of manganese. And it's more common in groundwater than surface water or like rivers and lakes, but it can also be found in surface water. And the challenge with manganese in particular is it can build up in the water system. So there can be some amount in the source water that makes its way to the distribution system, and then it can build up in pipes, and then the actual values seen at people's taps can kind of vary substantially. So that's why it's important to remove manganese before it enters the distribution system, and to maintain a distribution system well, do things like flushing and replacing certain pipes that where sediment buildup is more likely. And then the kind of section of things I want to talk about are volatile organic compounds that are really common across LA County because of the kind of history of industrial contamination in the area. So volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, are compounds that can dissolve in water but also vaporize into air. That's why they're called volatile. They kind of move between phases. And they are commonly used across especially the San Fernando Valley, but also in kind of South LA areas. And they can end up in water if they're not disposed of properly. They have a kind of cousin, I suppose, chemical of 1,4-dioxane, also used in industrial processes, some in consumer products as well. VOCs already have a lot of primary health-based standards set for them. So they're kind of regulated in drinking water, whereas dioxane only has a notification level thus far. And a notification level is basically the level at which a water system has to tell everyone who's served by that system that there's that chemical is present in their water, but they don't necessarily need to add treatment or anything like that for it yet. So it's kind of like an interim standard to get you to, or to fill a gap until the State Water Resources Control Board or the EPA have enough evidence to set a primary MCL. So in terms of the San Fernando Valley in particular, there's this kind of history of Superfund sites that existed across the valley. And now there's kind of widespread cleanup efforts. And a lot of those are for VOCs and 1,4-dioxane. And you can see actually kind of across the valley, there's these different contaminant plumes. You can see the different contours of contamination here. There's kind of this hot spot right here, but then there's a larger spread of contaminants. And then for TCE, it's kind of a different set of more highly contaminated areas than others, but also kind of has this interesting hotspot and then lighter contaminants. And actually, before I go to the next, what's really important when thinking about this type of widespread contamination, there's the potential to do really focused remediation efforts. And that is happening across the San Fernando Valley, where there are treatment systems right above these like highly contaminated areas where they're trying to kind of suck out the worst of the contaminated water and remove contaminants so that the groundwater basin can be cleaned up. And then there's also at the same time drinking water systems that are trying to make use of that water still. So they're perhaps on the edge of the plume, but they still have treatment to remove those contaminants to make sure that they're serving safe water. So there's that kind of dual, like really focused on remediating the groundwater basin, and then also drinking water systems trying to make use of their water, the local water resources, while keeping people safe. So the other thing that I want to highlight before we kind of move into our longer discussion on CCRs is PFAS, or per and polyfluoral alkyl substances. And I saw a few folks, I think, mention these in their concerns about water in their communities. And there are a few reasons why these are on a lot of folks' minds. One is that they break down really slowly, and you can see them referred to as forever chemicals or as being highly persistent in the environment. That's a phrase that you hear over and over again with PFAS. And also the fact that they're really widely used. They're in consumer products. They're kind of used to coat a lot of like non-stick food material, like some old pans and things like that. There's been a kind of process of realizing that these are an issue and starting to regulate them in different ways. And the California State Water Board started sampling for PFAS a few years ago in drinking water sources. And PFAS are a group of thousands of chemicals, but PFOA and PFOS are two that you'll hear about a lot, and they're kind of most widely used and studied. And I'll try to go through this timeline quickly, but PFAS were used really commonly in industrial products starting in about the 1950s. And then we started to realize kind of collectively as a society, I suppose, that they were present in the environment even way after they had been used in a certain area or far away from where they had been used in the early 2000s. And that prompted a number of governments to decide to eliminate the use of certain PFAS. Specifically, PFOA was the focus of those restrictions initially. And then also for the EPA to set some health advisory levels. And then recently there's a United Nations meeting where 180 or more than 180 countries decided to ban production of PFOA. But part of the problem with PFAS as a kind of class of compounds is that this one, and to some extent 2 or 3 PFAS compounds have been a focus, but there are thousands more that have yet to be kind of researched in the same way and have yet to be regulated in the same way. This is just a quick note of the many places where PFAS are found. And you'll get these slides after the workshop today, so you can look back at this in some more detail later. And then a quick kind of visual of how PFAS get into our water. There's kind of a few different pathways illustrated here, but this isn't exhaustive. A lot of one that I think aren't as, or one pathway that isn't as well known to everyone is via firefighting foam. And this is in particular for firefighting foam used at airports and military bases. It's not necessarily like your city firefighting chemicals that contain PFAS. but by an airport and other facilities can make their way into both groundwater and surface water, and also landfills that contain consumer products with PFAS can result in that contamination. So there's some kind of efforts to have interim regulations around PFAS because there's the requirement that we talked about in the first workshop to have a lot of kind of health-based data and research on the impacts of certain chemicals before the EPA or before the California State Water Resources Control Board can set a primary maximum contaminant level for contaminants in drinking water. There are these interim levels, and for these three PFAS compounds, they've set the California State Water Resources Control Board has set notification levels, which again, similar to dioxane, mean that people have to be notified that those contaminants are in their drinking water, either via their consumer confidence report or via separate mailing. And then the response levels are when a water system is required to consider doing certain actions like shutting off a well that has that contaminant, or adding treatment, or blending that water with other water sources that are lower, have lower concentrations of that contaminant. But it's still not required in the same way that actions are required when a maximum contaminant level is violated. So this is kind of the point we are at in the emerging contaminant kind of process for with PFAS. So that's kind of a quick discussion of a few contaminants that might be on people's minds and their sources in the environment and kind of regulations on their presence in drinking water. But now I will turn it over to Andrea to talk us through consumer confidence reports or drinking water quality reports. Andrea, do you want to share your screen or do you want me to?
I can share my screen.
Okay.
Give me 1 second. Okay, are you? Wait.
We can see it.
Which one? The presentation?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yep.
Perfect.
Presentation.
Okay, so yeah, my name is Andrea, and I will be talking today about how to read a consumer confidence report. So first, the Consumer Confidence Report is an annual water quality report that all community water systems are required to provide to their customers. It has to be released every year by July 1st. And some of the information that you'll be able to find in this report includes where your water comes from, a list of all regulated contaminants, potential health effects, and then these contaminant levels compared to national standards, and if there were any violations to any of these standards. So there are different contaminant types that are reported in your CCRs. First, there's the primary contaminants, which are legally enforceable on a national level. And you can also find secondary contaminants, which are enforceable but here by the state of California. And this is just in recognition that we all have a right to safe and clean drinking water. You can also find drinking water contaminants with notification levels, which Tori was explaining a bit about earlier. These are just required to, if the level is passed, the water system is required to report the concentration. And lastly, you can find the contaminants under the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule. This is an EPA rule that requires public water systems to monitor up to 30 selected contaminants of emerging concern once every 5 years. So these contaminants of emerging concern are contaminants that don't have primary regulations just yet, but are under evaluation by EPA. So yeah, the EPA has set section, well, 8 required sections for all CCRs. So just to quickly go over them, all CCRs need to provide water system information. This includes contact information and also different ways for public participation. They need to include the sources of water. So where does your water come from? Is it surface water from a lake or a river, or groundwater from a well in the area, or imported water? Thirdly, definitions. So you will see a table in your CCR, and the CCR, the water systems are required to provide a list of all the definitions for the terms that are used in the table. And that's actually really helpful when you're trying to read your CCR and the water quality table, because you can go back to this set of definitions to understand what it is that you're looking at. For the detected contaminants, so this is the actual water table that lists all the concentrations of the contaminants detected in your water. This can be, the table can actually be formatted in many different ways, and we will go over that later in the presentation, but all CCRs will have this water quality table. 5, any additional information on monitoring certain contaminants. So this relates to other monitoring processes and explaining a little more about how they monitor the contaminants that are reported there. 6, compliance with other drinking water regulations. Any violations to additional regulations such as the lead and copper rule or groundwater rule special notices or notification levels and things like that. 7, variances and exceptions. This is only if applicable, and most CCRs will actually not have this. And then 8, required educational information. So CCRs will have some like small paragraphs and explanations on general topics concerning water quality and explanation about the different types of contaminants and things like that, that will hopefully provide a little more information for your better understanding of your CCR. So going a little over some of the terms that you will see in your drinking water quality data table. So you are probably familiar with some of this, but I'll try to go over them quickly just as a review. So your table, just a thing to note, your table might be formatted in a different way, but they will all provide kind of the same information. It might just look different from this one. But essentially, it will have this column where it will provide the concentration of each of these contaminants. It's coded, so there are a lot more, but it will provide the concentration for all of these contaminants here, the one that was present in your water. This is an average, and it will also provide a range, so the low and high concentrations for each contaminant. And so when you look at this, you will have as a reference the maximum contaminant level goals and the maximum contaminant level. And you will want to compare it to the maximum contaminant level, because by comparing it to this column, you will be able to tell whether or not there was a violation, because the maximum contaminant level is the limit concentration before the standard is violated. But these maximum contaminant level goals are also provided as a reference. These are just like the ideal situation that EPA has set for them. But if your water's concentration exceeds any goal, it's not a violation to a drinking standard. So you just have to compare it to the maximum contaminant levels. And the water systems are actually asked to provide information on whether or not there was a violation. Some might include a column for it, like this one. It's pretty nice because it will tell you yes or no for whether or not there was a violation. Others will provide the information in a different way, like putting an asterisk next to the contaminants. But all of this should be explained in your report, like how they are presenting the information. So you should be able to know before you get to the table what you're expecting to see. And these are just some of the other definitions that I just talked about. So today I'm going to go over 2 different CCRs just as an example. And I will go over the 8 required sections and point them out as to like just showing screenshots of some sections of the CCR reports and showing you how the water agency was able to, well, show that information that's required. So this is just a reminder of the water system governance map. So here you can see the different water system governance types and how they are spread around the LA County. And today we'll go over LADWP's CCR and Track 180's CCR. And yeah, so let's start with LADWP's CCR. So the first section was water system information. So LADWP CCR is very user-friendly and has a lot of colors and pictures. So it's very organized. And here are just some screenshots of the water system information. They have numbers that you can call to and ways for you to reach out the water system agency. And then they also have public participation opportunities. So here they have the information for their regular meetings. and ways in which you can attend those meetings and numbers that you can call to if you have any questions. The second one is sources of water. So they provide this nice map that shows where the water comes from. So for example, here, the map shows that 73% of the water for delivered to LA City, it's imported water from the State Water Project and the Colorado River Aqueduct. 12% comes from LA Aqueduct, and so on. There's also the definition section. So like I said, it is important for them to explain all of these terms that you will find in the drinking water quality table, which is the next section. But yeah, here are the list of all the terms and some of the explanations. And they also have the abbreviations in parentheses, which is very helpful because that's how they are presented in the table, which is next. So this table is the list of the detected contaminants. It's very well, so for this report in particular, they had an explanation on how to read your table before they presented the actual tables. So that's very helpful to understand because the table might look different from CCR to CCR. In this one in particular, LADWP decided to organize their table based on water sources. So in this how to read the table section that was presented beforehand, it explained which water sources, which of these correspond to each LA County area. So if you're from LA County area X, for example, and you receive water from these two sources, then your information will be found in these two columns. And that's explained in the report. So yeah, here they organize, like I said, the average concentration for each of the contaminants and then the range, and they provide the MCL, and then the PHG, which is the public health goal. So a thing to note is that some CCRs will provide the maximum contaminant level goal, which is set nationally, and others will provide the public health goal, which is set by the state. And it's just important to realize that this might not be the same. So the number set by the state might differ from the one set nationally, but they have the same purpose. And here they also have a nice column that says whether or not the primary standard was met, yes or no. And in this particular case, both primary standards and secondary standards for LADWP were all met. And so these are just the first two tables, but the report also has tables for unregulated drinking water substances detected in treated water, and also a table for EPA's unregulated contaminant monitoring rule. And then section 5 is additional monitoring information. So they have two short articles on different processes that they use for monitoring, like a new UV disinfection plant and the implementation of a cross-connection control program here. And you can read more about that in the report. 6, compliance with other drinking water regulations. This one in particular was mostly about the lead and copper rule. And they first explain it and then they talk about it in relation to Los Angeles. And then 7 actually was not applicable. So they didn't have any variances or exceptions. So jumping on to number 8, required educational information. LADWP has a lot of sections just explaining more information about what you're going to find in this report. So for example, talking about drinking water and your health, and then explaining all the contaminants that may be present. And they also have health advisory for people with weakened immune systems. So that's LADWP's CCR. And then track 180s, I will go over the same sections quickly. And you will be able to see that it looks pretty different, but you'll notice that all of the sections are included. So first, water system information. It is a lot shorter, but the information is there. So how can I participate in decisions on water issues that affect me? So like the board meetings and public participation opportunities, and then ways to contact the water agency. And then number 2, sources of water. So they provide this map to show the service area, and here they explain that all of their water is groundwater. So that checks out. And then 3, definitions. So again, it has a table listing all the definitions, all the terms and their definitions that you will find in your drinking water quality table. And here are the abbreviations that are referred to in the table as well, which is pretty helpful to have as you're reading the table. And now the interesting part, the detected contaminants. So this, as you can see, their tables are organized differently. First of all of their water is groundwater, so they don't separate it by water source like LADWP did, but they do split it in two tables, like for each standard, like primary standards are divided into two tables and secondary standards into two tables. One where it's monitored at the source, and then the other one when it's monitored in the distribution system. And this is a very important difference to like see when you look at these tables, because it affects the representation that these contaminants may have in your water, because there is a difference between monitoring them at the distribution system compared to monitoring them at the source. So yeah, they list the contaminants here. They provide the average concentration, the range, the primary MCL, and here they say PHD, so the public PHG, so the public health goal, or the MCLG, which is the difference that I pointed out earlier. And besides these two tables about primary standards and secondary standards, Track 180 also has tables for additional chemicals of interest and EPA's unregulated contaminant monitoring rule. So moving on to section 5, additional monitoring information. They have a brief explanation on how the drinking water is tested. So that's just more general information about the monitoring processes. 6, compliance with other drinking water regulations. So this highlighted line here, it refers to the notification level for 1,4-dioxane, which was exceeded in 2 wells. But again, this is the notification level. So that's just a reporting regulation. And this is why the information for 1,4-dioxane was presented in the CCR, because since they exceeded the notification level, the water agency is required to report on their concentrations. And again, section 7 is not applicable because there were no variances and exceptions. So moving on to section 8, required educational information. It provides some explanation similar to the one in LADWPs, general information about the different contaminants that may be present, any additional precautions for more vulnerable populations, and just a general overview of what drinking water standards are. So before we go to the next section, that concludes the review of all the CCRs. And I just want to like make a general summary of them. As you saw, all of the 8 sections were included in both CCRs, and they look pretty different. Track 180s, which is a smaller water agency, is much simpler, but it includes all of the required sections as stated by EPA. And yeah, now we're gonna move on to finding your own CCR. But before we do that, I want to go over some of the resources that you might be using. So the first step for finding your CCR will be determining your water system. If you already know that, that's great. You can move on to step 2. But if you don't, I'll quickly go over the tool that you would use for that. So give me 1 second. Okay. So can you see the screen still? Okay, so I'm at the water system governance map, which I showed a screenshot of earlier. So you will see this, and then if you go to the search function and you type an address, your address, it will provide a pin. So this pin is in this yellow area. So I click on the yellow area, and it gives me my water system, which is, let's say that it's track 180. Also, just so you know, all of your facilitators in your breakout rooms will have these resources, so they will send over chat for you to be able to access them. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. So I'll continue over going over these resources quickly, but feel free to ask your facilitators if you have any questions. So yeah, okay, so my water system is track 180. So now that I have that, the next step is to actually find my CCR. So we will try using the California Drinking Water Watch. So if I click on the website, I'll get to this. And here in water system name, I will type track 180 and search. And in this case, I am sent straight to the track 180's page, which is very helpful. However, that might not be the case for you. You might end up having multiple options for you to choose from, or nothing might show up and you'll just have to do trial and error about how you typed the name. So for example, this is the full name, but there could be a dash here, and if I didn't know that, it just won't show up. But it's trial and error, but your facilitators will have solutions for you if you're unable to find yours right away. So let's say you did, though, for example, so you're in this page now. If you go to this side, consumer confidence reports, we're going to try to find the most recent one. So we'll click on 2021, and that will take us here, and hopefully your report will be linked. If it is not, again, your facilitators will have solutions for you. But since it is, I click on it, and that will take me to the CCR. And as you can see, this is where I took some of the pictures that I showed earlier from. So this is track 180 CCR. So yeah, that's kind of the exercise that we will let you guys go through. And as we get into breakout rooms, we'll ask you to keep in mind these questions for discussion. So what is your water source, or R, if there's more than one? What are some contaminants that have been detected? And then are there any violations of drinking water regulations? One thing to keep in mind is that contaminants will be detected because they are present. But again, like I mentioned in the examples, the important thing is to compare them to the maximum contaminant levels. And as said as well, if there are any violations, it will be indicated in your CCR. And as we regroup afterwards, we will ask you for some key takeaways that you would like to share to your community. So just keep that question in mind as well as you go over your CCR. And I will now let Roland take it over to put us into breakout rooms and start the exercise.
One quick note on the water system governance map. You might see that there's a consumer confidence report link, and that most of the time goes to the 2019 CCR, since the governance map is a little out of date with those links. So that's why we're going through the process of finding it on the California Drinking Water Watch website too. So you get the most recent information on your water system and know how to find those.
Yeah. So here is the link to the consumer confidence report, but like Tori was mentioning, it would take me to the 2019 CCR. So we'll try to avoid that.
All right, so are we ready for breakout rooms yet? Okay.
Yes, we are ready.
All right, let's see.
So
Here.
remember, folks, when you go into the breakout room, you'll be identifying your, you'll be finding the consumer confidence report for your region. You can choose either yourself or a location nearby, and then you're going to go through and identify some of the contaminants and see if there's any, see what else you notice based off of what Andrea just shared with us of what to look for in your report.
Sorry. Yeah.
And Francisco, if you can't find your CCR in your pile of bills, you can also use the links that we're sharing to get it directly from the website.
Oops, sorry, I feel like I did this wrong really quick.
Okay.
Let me try again.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Yeah.
And per Francisco's note, some of you might receive CCRs in the mail or to your email inbox if you're kind of directly registered with your water system. But if you are in if you're a renter and your landlord pays your water bill, they will often get the CCR, and sometimes they'll pass it on to you, but there's kind of like a potential break in the pathway for CCR delivery, which is why repositories like the California Drinking Water Watch can be really helpful.
Okay, I think I figured it out. I might have to switch some of the room leaders, but that's about it. So if you want to go ahead and start joining.
Hey, Roland.
Hello. Sorry, I just didn't realize I could join a breakout room.
Yeah, join the club. Or
And you
just
apparently bring your recording with us.
I
Yeah,
know.
sorry about that. I could leave if you're talking about things.
No.
It's fine.
No, all good. Yeah, yeah. It was just that was the first time I heard that
Yeah,
happen. Like
in a
it-
breakout group. I wonder how that works on your end when you like look at the recording, if it's like partial full group, partial breakout group.
Yeah, I feel like the last 5 or 10 minutes of the recording might just be a blank screen now that I think about it.
That's fine. Francisco, I feel like your consumer confidence report is actually easier to read. Like I feel like Santa Clarita Valley is trying to show you all the information, but in some ways it's like, I don't know, Gabriela, what you think. It's like information overload. Like,
Yeah, definitely.
whereas Huntington Park also does groundwater versus the imported water. So they talk about the kind of contaminants based on the water source.
Does it say percentages of like how much percent comes from the groundwater, how much percent comes from the
Let's
imported
see.
water source? I'm wondering.
No, it doesn't say. It's a good question though. It just says these water sources located on the adjacent map supply our service area. Yeah, it doesn't say.
Oh, good. That would be interesting just to know,
Yeah,
because if we're talking about local sustainability and
right.
not taking from other communities, it'd be like we're a small town, but you know, X percentage is coming from, what did we say, Colorado River State Project?
Yeah, it looks like it's a combination. So Metropolitan Water District is a huge wholesaler that distributes to a number of water agencies in Southern California. And they get their surface water from both the Colorado River and the State Water Project, which is Northern California water.
Mm,
So it's a combination.
I think it's just crazy to see because you see like these bodies of water and just like locally, and you're like, wait, my water isn't coming from that giant reservoir right there next to my house.
Right.
yeah.
Oil drilling, waste, and metal refinery discharge. What's this one? Barium.
This is really, really great. I'm thinking because most of the families that we work with are renters and they never get this.
Yeah.
Probably the property manager or whatever gets it and like, whatever, tosses it. And, but definitely gonna see how we can, show, do like,
Yeah,
get this together.
one thing that Tori did for all of us facilitators is put together like a facilitation guide of how to walk through this process. And I said to her, like, can we make this something that we can share with the leadership group, is something that if you wanted to go through this process with your community members, you'd have like the instructions to do so. That would be helpful. Well, and where do you live? Have you found your
I actually used to help print them. I live in the city of Whittier, so I'm very familiar with CCR reports.
Interesting.
Yeah, I haven't looked at the Whittier one recently. I really should, but yeah, when I was in the water division and public works department, me and 2 others were in charge of printing them and getting them mailed out, which that was always fun and not stressful.
Yeah, I bet. That's really cool. I didn't know that about your background, Roland. It's interesting too, for Huntington Park, they have a whole section on, because manganese, I think as we've talked about as a group, is a contaminant that's currently doesn't have an MCL set for it, but there's one being developed or conversations being developed in the legislature level. And they have a section in here about, it's called an unregulated contaminant monitoring regulation, which is a confusing title. But it basically talks about how, it's likely that it's going to start being regulated. And so in 2018, 2019, the city of Huntington Park began monitoring for a total of 30 chemical contaminants from its wells, even though it's not necessarily required to do so yet, it looks like.
What was that you said?
This last piece here, let me share what I'm looking at. It's like the very bottom of the report for Huntington Park. So there are unregulated contaminants. They don't have a drinking water standard yet set by the EPA, but I know at least in California, there's discussions in the legislature of setting a contaminant level for manganese. And so it's something that it looks like they are trying to share some information about on the Consumer Confidence Report about their testing for unregulated contaminants and monitoring. Which I haven't seen this type of like background section in other CCRs. Roland, I'm curious if that's something that you've seen.
I think I've seen something similar before. I'm sorry, I'm really distracted by the font style they chose.
This is not the only, I said that this is not the only one that has Comic Sans, and we pulled one up and I was like, what are we
Yeah,
doing here with this Comic Sans?
That seems so crazy for a municipal government to use that.
I think that's so funny you said that. You'll have to tell Chris that, because when her and I were reviewing one together, I was like, this Comic Sans is really distracting to me.
Yeah, but I would have to look again. But I want to say, I feel like when I used to help out with Whittier's, and again, I wasn't one of the main people like writing it up or anything, but I remember because even just like the printing and shipping process, I stared at one for too many hours. And like there was a section towards the end that I feel like was stuff that was not necessarily like a legal requirement, but kind of like for just like an attempt. I don't know, I guess maybe an attempt at transparency, maybe, but
Yeah.
there was just kind of like additional context added.
Yeah. It does look like Santa Clarita also has like additional tests, which are ones that are not required, it looks like, or at least don't have like an MCL for some of them, but are still being tested for, including the PFOA, PFOS contaminants that Tori was talking about.
Is there anything alarming that you're noting in any of these? Like, I wouldn't know, like, oh, wow, that trihalomethane's level looks a little too high for me,
So this one is super dense and confusing, I think, a little bit to read, because so the MCL is here in this column, which is the like federally regulated or set standard for the maximum contaminant levels. And then the public health goal is the kind of California set like aspirational standard. And then it looks like the DLR is the detection limit for purposes of reporting. So that's the smallest concentration of the contaminant that can be measured and reported. So these are all like standardized, these 3 columns. And then the Santa Clarita Valley Water District goes through each kind of division and looks at the ranges. So this is just like standard comparison. So if I were, you'd have to know, Gabriella, which division you're in order to like make that comparison of, okay, I don't know, I'm interested in looking at lead, right? And the MCL is 15. The public health goal is 0.2, which is really interesting also. Like that is so much lower than 15.
And top of the, oops, sorry for interrupting. I was just going to say, like you brought up, like, Gabriella would have to know what district she's in, but like, most residents don't know how to find that information.
Right. Yeah, Gabriela, would you know, looking at these district or division titles?
I don't think they're very clear, TBH. I know I personally live in the Santa Clarita Water Division, but I found that out through the UCLA map.
Mm,
So like once we give, like if we're giving people the UCLA map, then they can kind of see like the Valencia Water Division, all of that. When you
mm.
go up there, you kind of see that there's spaces without even
Oh,
water.
Oh, interesting. So it has the division. Oh, in the map. I see.
I guess the water provider would probably have a map as well, right? The agency itself.
Well, I think it's all Santa Clarita Valley Water Agency, but then their
Hmm.
actual district, their system is divided into divisions. So it almost feels like having all of them in one CCR is not helpful. And you should just have what is applicable to you. I mean, I guess unless you like live and work, some of these are like overlapping, right? Or
I think
there's a lot
a separate page for each of the divisions would be helpful.
with like a map
Look
of the
like
boundaries. Yeah.
because seeing that is very overwhelming.
Yeah. I mean, this is like also very zoomed in. This is like how it looks when you like scroll down, which is like, I get that you want to have less pages, but tiny, tiny font is probably not.
It's very welcoming.
Yeah. Yeah, Francisco, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to take the second or the last 30 on the road. So I'm
Okay.
gonna call in. I'll see you in the main room a little bit.
Sounds good.
Yeah, no problem. Talia just messaged me. I actually need to get us all
Jump back.
Okay.
So
Okay.
thank you for reminding me.
Be well.
Thank you. Gabriela, is there anything you would report back to the full group, or like some takeaways to share that you would share with your community?
It's really hard to read. Two, I think like I do like how on this report they sort of put in its own separate box where the water comes from, because that kind of like takes your eye there.
You mean for Francisco's like sources?
Mhm.
Yeah, the sources of contamination in drinking water.
And then I don't know, the Santa Clarita one is just like really hard to read, and you really got to know where you live, because if you're just living in Santa Clarita to live there, odds are you don't know which district you're getting your water from.
Right. Yeah. These are all good takeaways. Yeah, it's super interesting comparing the two, I
Oh
think.
yeah. Wow. That is a huge difference.
Yeah.
All had ties. So it was very easy for us to zoom
Great.
in on the Pasadena area.
Perfect.
So welcome
Chris,
back, everyone.
Chris, you laughed that Comic Sans did come up in our breakout group.
It's so
came up
weird.
with Alex, too.
Comic Sans. I mean, come on.
Shame on those cities.
Jay Shao shares the sentiment.
Key
So
takeaway. Comic Sans used for
Comic Sans is a no. So hopefully you all got a chance to dive a little deeper into I'm not mad at the papyrus street signs. I think I would find that endearing. Hopefully you got a chance to dive a bit deeper into your water systems or into some local water systems. I hope you were able to check out where some of the water sources come from as well. What are some key things, key takeaways that you got from the report that you'd like to share with your community, that you think your neighbors and your friends need to know about your water systems? And feel free to come off of mute and just say something that you saw, that you learned, that you thought was interesting. Hopefully your report was not one of the ones written in Comic Sans.
One, we actually kind of had a question or two that came up in understanding things. We were able to kind of do a comparison of looking at 4 different water reports. Everybody had a different one, which is great. And so comparing like the different sources of water, were significantly different in some cases. Anywhere from, 10% groundwater up to 100% groundwater, depending upon where you are and what's going on. But a little confused about, like if we were to look at, say, what are some key contaminants that are looked at in a given area or system, it really wasn't clear from the report how we might discern that. I mean, there's certainly a list of what's being tested for, but it's all in alphabetical order. The measurements tend to be slightly different from one to another based on what the standard is, and trying to understand what might be, if they're, and while nothing falls out of, falls into the realm of outside of regulation or, are there still things, are there ways to look at this and say, well, what might be some of the key issues that our water agency has to keep an eye on most significantly? That was one. And there was a reference in one of the reports that there's some type of monitoring that's done every 9 years, and wasn't quite certain what that referred to. If that made sense to anyone, if that sounds familiar to anybody who's dug deeper into these. Anyway, those were a few things that popped up from our group.
Yeah, I might jump in briefly and try to give a quick answer, but might be worth further discussion too. But all of the contaminants that are noted on a CCR have been detected. So you'll see that like some water systems don't have the full list of like volatile organic compounds that are regulated on their CCR because they only detected 1 or 2 of them, or maybe 0 even. Maybe they don't have any VOCs. So if they're listed in that table, that is because they're detected at some level. And then you look at them, look at the values alongside the primary maximum contaminant level, which is the health-based standard that water systems are regulated to. And you can also look at it next to the public health goal, which is the kind of ideal. If we could rid all of our contaminants from our water sources, that would be the point at which there would be no negative impact on human health. So you look at those values next to those, next to the MCL and next to the PHG.
So if it's in the table, it's in the water.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the every 9 years, was that your lead and copper, or was that the UCMR data?
Chris,
The unregulated contaminant monitoring rule?
Chris, do you remember where you saw it? Was that it?
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. It was under the testing results. And then it says it goes down to it, and it just says that like they do testing every 9 years, as what, like they're using data from results are from 2011. Let's see, results are from 2012. 2012, next samples will be collected in 2020. So I'm wondering, is the 9-year testing gap a regular thing?
And what contaminants was that? Were those for?
Let me look at this. Sorry, that was the other observation.
okay.
It's just not very user friendly. It really
Yeah.
is. So that's a whole nother subject about if they want people to understand these reports.
Yeah.
But I think it came after, I'll find it and I'll get back to you. I think it was after the MCLs for E. coli. I don't want to give you the wrong information. I'll look at it and I'll tell you.
Cool. Okay.
From City of Pomona.
while Christy is looking at that, are there other takeaways that folks want to share?
In my group, Jean had a very interesting question that I suggested for her to share to the main group. So I don't know, Jean, if you want to like jump on.
Yeah, I was thinking about this as folks were sharing, but one of the things that I guess when we're kind of sharing this information to our community members, that's one of the things that does come up is premise plumbing. And so just kind of talking through how to frame that, trying to be as transparent as possible, but also wanting to still encourage people to trust their water and also share this information. Also, yeah, as Christy mentioned, in a more digestible way and easy to understand way. So yeah, we had kind of touched on that and how to kind of frame that. But also I wanted to share something I shared with the other group too. And if other folks have like resources similar to this, I think it could be a useful way to like engage with community. But one of the things that I saw at a previous event, I think Home Depot had a booth and they were giving out like these free like water testing kits. And they said that they were open to, I guess, partnering with different groups or organizations and just giving them out for free. And if they want to distribute to their community members. So I thought that was kind of cool. We haven't reached out, but just wanted to share with you all in case that's something of interest too. But yeah, I was just kind of asking about just different community engagement like strategies or ways to kind of communicate this information. Because when we talk to specifically Alhambra residents, a lot of those buildings are on the older side. And so I think people do have a lot of issues with their plumbing and pipes in general. And so I think that's a common thing that at least we hear a lot about too. So.
Yeah, for sure. And premise plumbing, as we've discussed, is something to be thoughtful about. And one thing that we have a few slides on in a few minutes is the lead and copper rule, which some of you might have seen in your CCR. The results of sampling of a kind of select set of taps in a water systems area. A system is required to test a certain number based on their size and based on how their levels have looked over time, how their lead and copper levels have looked. And they are specifically required to look at kind of the worst case scenario. So houses that were built before certain regulations about lead content in plumbing materials were set. So it's before 1986 for most kind of plumbing materials. So that's a helpful thing to point people to if they're really concerned about potential lead levels. They can look at the results of the LCR sampling. It won't be for, or it likely won't be for their actual house, but you can see kind of how corrosive the water might be. And if those levels are extremely low, that's pretty comforting. If it's way below what's called the action level, it's kind of a sign that if your house is kind of in a similar worst case scenario in terms of like plumbing material, it's more likely that it will be safe than if the levels in those other houses were really high. But to your point about actually testing people's taps, one of the big kind of outcomes of our project development process is the development of a tap water quality testing program that will kind of hopefully help people to have more detailed information about what's happening at their specific taps.
Gabriella, do you want to share about our discussion in our group? I thought it was super interesting.
Yeah, so the cities that we focused on were Santa Clarita and then Huntington Park. I am from Santa Clarita, so that's the one that I was staring at for most of the time. And it was really difficult to sort of piece it apart. I found that the Huntington Park one was a lot more like user-friendly despite the Comic Sans. It was just like they had little footnotes. They told you basically like where the sources of contamination were and what was like causing that sort of contamination. Whereas if you go to the Santa Clarita one, it's kind of like, here's just a chart. and we're gonna put each little division of the Santa Clarita Water District on that chart, and you gotta like sort of figure out what you're looking at. Yeah, so that was a little like weird. It was just hard to look at. But yeah, I think like my biggest question in regards to it is like the detection limit for purposes of reporting. They kind of put that in a lot of the little boxes, saying like that the minimum and maximum range were like less than the detection limit, but they didn't actually share what that limit was. So I thought that was something that I feel like people would want to know.
Yeah, and sometimes I think water systems all strike a different balance of providing a lot of information and versus simplifying things down. And there are concerns on, I suppose, both ends of that spectrum of kind of overwhelming people with things versus being fully transparent. On the detection limit, and this is kind of a helpful resource across the board, although it's a poorly formatted table. There's a state water board reference that has all of the regulated drinking water contaminants and the state maximum contaminant level, the state detection limit for purposes of reporting, or DLR, and the state pH or public health goal, and then how that compares to the federal maximum contaminant levels and maximum contaminant level goal. So this might clear up some of those questions. But yeah, I think a few of you have touched on one of the wider spread criticisms of CCRs overall, that they require a lot of knowledge to be able to kind of get the information you want out of them. And someone who just has a half hour to quickly look it over one afternoon is not necessarily going to be able to have the insight that they want to have. And so there's different efforts to try to prompt improvements to the template, like at a federal level, but also to help people understand their CCRs kind of as they stand. And that's what we're all doing here today.
Awesome. So we should move forward to talk about the last element of the conversation today, which would be drinking water in schools, which I know you all had a lot of questions about in the past, and we want to give some time to kind of touch on that point.
Yes, I'm gonna share my screen over here. Let me know when you can see it again. Everyone able to see it? Perfect.
Yes.
Great. Yep. And I'm gonna have that right there. Okay. So I'm gonna try to go quick since we have kind of limited time, and we might just not do, we had a little exercise that we wanted to do, but maybe we'll send you the link instead. So on the note of drinking water in schools, we were talking earlier about kind of the connection between source pollution or pollution of drinking water sources and drinking water quality at the tap. But now we're kind of focused on the latter part. So if we can kind of understand what's happening in a drinking water system overall, we have insight into what contaminants might be present in the water source and going into the distribution system, but not that might be at specific taps if there's contribution of certain metals and such from premise plumbing. And that becomes kind of more of an issue in schools where there's more piping between the water meter that is where a water system is relaying drinking water to a school. So there's kind of that more extensive piping. And the other kind of challenge there is that a lot of schools were constructed several decades ago, sometimes before there were certain regulations around lead levels in plumbing fixtures. So there are, I guess, overall, you can look at a consumer confidence report to understand drinking water quality at a school, kind of understand the full set of regulated contaminants that could be present or might not be present. but lead is kind of a specific focus given given what I just shared, and also given that it's a toxic metal that is known to have harmful effects on human health, especially on the health of children at even low levels. That's why there's a maximum contaminant level goal, or MCLG, of 0 for lead. So I mentioned this before, but there's kind of this interesting legislative history that it's helpful to know a little bit about. There were Safe Drinking Water Act amendments in 1986 that defined lead-free and required drinking water pipes and fixtures and fittings to be lead-free. Interestingly, lead-free for pipes then was less than 8% lead, which is higher than we fortunately now define it as, but is lower than pipes that were installed previously. In 1991, there's a first version of the lead and copper rule that set requirements for drinking water systems to test lead and copper at a certain number of taps. Again, for households that were constructed before '86 to kind of have the worst case scenario. And then there are further Safe Drinking Water Act amendments in 1996 that prohibited the introduction of non-lead-free plumbing. And then there's the Reduction of Lead in Drinking Water Act that really defined a more reasonable definition of lead-free, which is less than 0.25% for any plumbing products that come in contact with water, basically. And then recently, the California Health and Safety Code was amended to require all public water systems, or all community water systems rather, to compile an inventory of known lead lines or unknown lead service lines. And that's something that we linked in the first drinking water quality workshop. So that kind of gives people insight into whether or not there might be lead in the distribution system that's delivering water to their houses or schools or businesses. And then more recently, there's an assembly bill in California that required all community water systems in California to conduct lead sampling at public K-12 schools by July 2019. And I think we don't necessarily have time to go to it today, so I'll just click through these slides quickly, but there's a helpful map. It's linked in the bottom of these slides, and we can share that with you after, that shows where there were exceedances of the action level for lead, which is 15 ppb, and those schools were required to do follow-up actions to remove those fixtures that had higher than acceptable lead levels, or to do flushing to kind of remove any lead that might be present in stagnant pipes. And then there are a lot of schools that were exempt because they previously had testing done. So this is kind of the suite of data that are available for schools that were sampled as a part of that assembly bill effort. But then there were exempt schools that had already sampled or had been constructed after that more kind of restrictive or more protective lead-free definition. And so in the database that we linked in the previous slide, all of those sampled schools have links to their own sampling report. So this repository, even for the schools that are exempt, is a great place to look for basically any school in California, whether they kind of what their lead levels were at each specific tap in their system, unless they were built after the more protective lead-free definitions were in place. I know a lot of you either live in Los Angeles or are engaged in the city of Los Angeles, and LAUSD has its own lead and drinking water program. They have a kind of distinct way of filing their data. They have this Principal's Corner website that you can access a lot of information about the school overall. But one of the tabs on the left-hand corner on that website shows drinking water quality reports, and that's all for lead levels at different fountains and different like sinks and things in a school. And they have a flushing policy that has kind of changed over the years. Initially, it required flushing for at least 30 seconds prior to the first use of the day. So custodial staff would have to run around and flush each faucet at the beginning of the school day. But now for schools where testing has shown that lead is likely not as much of a concern as they might have previously thought in those specific schools, then there's the kind of a little bit less extensive requirements that schools have to flush after holidays and weekends, but not every single day. There are a few different statewide efforts to try to address drinking water quality in schools. One is this grant program through the State Water Resources Control Board, and they kind of funnel that funding through self-help enterprises. And we heard from Sonia Sanchez of Self-Help a few workshops ago during the panel on organizing and advocacy around drinking water quality. So Sonia's organization is really key in this. Then also the Rural Community Assistance Corporation, and they work with schools to provide technical assistance and to provide funding for replacing fixtures, for adding point of use treatment, which is like right at the tap, a little like filter to remove certain contaminants. That program prioritizes schools that are served by a drinking water system that exceeds maximum contaminant levels, but they also have provisions, or they also have eligibility for schools that have lead levels above the action level. And right now, from my understanding, round 2 of this funding is coming to a close shortly because they have to spend all of the money down by next summer. But it's possible that there will be future rounds of funding, and this is something to pay attention to if you are interested in advocating for improved drinking water quality in schools that you are connected to. And then this is just briefly the kind of suite of roles that Self-Help and our CAC serve as technical assistance providers. They basically help schools that might not otherwise be able to acquire that funding to access it. So the last thing we wanted to note is that we know we only got to address a few topics today, and honestly, we're going pretty quick even as it is. So I know we are all eager to hear about other topics as well, but I'm glad we at least got to spend a meaningful amount of time on some key topics. But there are a bunch of other questions that all of you asked during the first and second workshop, and we're kind of working on a summary of these for you, and we'll share them out next week. If there are additional questions that you want to make sure you kind of have more information on, please feel free to voice them. And there are a few I know about the CCRs that folks shared, and we can make sure to incorporate those as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Tori, for powering through such important and in-depth information. And we want to be mindful of your time. Like Tori mentioned, that a lot of the questions that did come up are answered in the PowerPoint that you all will get access to. So hopefully that can address some of the things that were previously posed. However, Chris and I would like to officially ask, what, if any, unanswered questions do you want to include in workshop number 9, which will be the final workshop for this series? We're currently in the process of planning, and we want to make sure, since this will be the wrap up, that we cover any materials that you feel you want to go more in depth on, or you need more information about. Please feel free to share with us. You can share in the chat. You can unmute and share verbally and give us your thoughts. I will say that one thing that we are considering based off of the feedback from our last workshop is talking a little bit more about workforce development within the water world, and how you can support water professionals from your community servicing your community. So that's one topic that we are tossing around, but we would love to get more information about what you need to feel more prepared with this final workshop. Chris, did you want to add anything to that?
No, or field trip, is there a place you want us to explore and go to as part of it as well? And this doesn't have to be about water quality. I know we've been doing this whole series with water quality, but this has to do with all that we've learned, and if there's something that you feel like we've missed.
So please take a few moments to consider, put your thoughts in the chat. And that being said, please be on the lookout for upcoming invitations for workshop 9. We want to make sure that we get as much information to you as possible in a way that's manageable, and be here to support you as well in this process of engaging your communities. So in these last few minutes, feel free to share if you have anything to say. And also, please take some time to enter into the chat any burning, pressing questions that you may have.
Hi, everybody. This is Francisco. Sorry to interject. I'm on the road, but chat it. But a question that came up was, can we break down, or is it broken down, and maybe I missed it on the report, the percentage of water that is coming from outside the local ground water, if that's the case for the particular area we're looking at? In Huntington Park, for example, it's noted that water is coming from up north in the Colorado River plus groundwater, but it doesn't, that I know of, or maybe Emily missed it. It didn't say 70% of our water, whatever, is coming from these two sources. Only 30% is groundwater. For advocacy purposes or something, I think maybe that info would be helpful.
Yeah, and we have that information on a countywide level, and a lot of water systems, well, some water systems note it in their CCRs. Others will just say we rely on groundwater and surface water, or imported water. So that's kind of a mixed bag as to how detailed water systems are. I can share, when we share the slides, one of the slides has that breakdown countywide.
That was an excellent question.
I might just add before we jump, I think we're planning to come back to the LG in September 8th to also reconvene the tap water quality testing discussion and talk about what we've been working on since we last met, and kind of scope out what our this next phase, now that we know this project has been prioritized as a heavy lift, what this next phase might look like. So that's something that our team is working on now.
Yes, so be on the lookout for that September 8th invitation. And then we plan to host workshop 9 2 weeks after that. So we have a fun-filled September for everyone. Well, if there's nothing else and no one has anything else to share or to add, thank you for participating. Thank you for joining, and thank you for sharing this information to your community. And as always, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or any way that we can support you in this water journey. And thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you.
Hello.
Nice
Nice
job.
job.
Yeah, good job, everybody. Thank you.
I guess I could stop the recording.